calling herself Ruth of Island Bay because she says, as a former dog owner, I have to say too many dog owners don't have good control of their pets. I can see chaos ensuing if they're allowed on buses. Dogs often stink, they fight, they growl. The bus is miserable enough with people who have forgotten that deodorant exists.
Yeah, sounds like Ruth from Island Bay's a party on the bus as well.
Yeah, that is me, by the way.
I think it's anything that makes it easier to do public transport. Like you see in other cities around the world that have public transport kind of baked into how they operate. You have to be able to take your shopping on and have to be able to have big bags on.
And bikes.
And pets. And so, as more and more people move away from the traditional car ownership model, it's fantastic. It allows more people to not have to own cars and clog up the roads.
I'm glad they can take them to the vet as well, because that does concern me. If you don't have a car but you need to take your cat to the vet, that's good. But please just don't judge me for not liking your dog.
Bigger dogs aren't included, so I imagine you won't see a Rottie or a German Shepherd on the bus.
Thank God.
Yeah, well, that would be intimidating, isn't it? Anyway, there's a lot of people seemingly relieved to finally be able to have their pets travel with them. So it may become ubiquitous. While we're on the subject, have you ever owned dogs or cats, either of you?
Cats, yes.
Cats, yes.
I have had a cat too.
You both had cats?
Yes.
How do you view your dog or your cat as a family member or as property?
As a family member.
Really? Truly?
Yeah, truly.
Is there something in the middle?
Somewhere, not like the unfavourite child.
Yeah, like it's not a chattel, but it's
it's like a cousin that you don't like very much.
Yeah, like not exactly like I choose to have a cat.
I
don't choose.
Oh God, your cat's sitting at home being like, I hate you, Simon.
No complaints about
I think you
family.
should stop there.
Anyone listening?
Traditionally, pets have been property, domesticated animals that are owned, and you can't be cruel to them, etc., and you should love them, but they don't enjoy the familial rights of humans. But an interesting legal decision in Canada, in the Newfoundland and Labrador, excuse the pun, Court of Appeal, suggests people view pets as family now, and when it comes to divorce, for example, they should not be treated like other chattels. I wonder if this is also a sign of the times, which we're going to have to get used to.
Shared custody.
Well, a friend of mine who just split up from his girlfriend now has shared custody of the dogs. Every weekend it goes to
How
their
does
house.
that work? Oh, okay.
Yeah, so every weekend he takes them over to her place. And I think they do a week there and then they come back.
And the dog gets heaps of treats because they're all competing for the attention.
You couldn't do that with cats, though, because cats would just get really confused and probably just go back to their favourite spot and leave.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
And then you'd know who the favourite was.
Exactly.
The case the court considered was that of Maya, a Bernese mountain dog poodle cross. Claimed by the man in a relationship when it ended because he had bought the dog, but the woman successfully applied for joint ownership because she had supplied most of the care and affection. Is that fair enough, or is that going too far along the anthropomorphic road?
No, I think that's fair.
Dog loves me more.
Well, people genuinely adore their pets, and their pets are huge parts of their life in terms of compensating for feelings of like loneliness or support or enjoyment. And I think that, if I love my cat that much, I would expect joint ownership.
Simon's a bit more jaundiced.
Whatever makes you happy.
I'm not going to commit. You do you, boo.
You've got a good heart, Verity. Verity Johnson's been on the panel today with Simon Pound. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Verity.
Thanks, Jim.
We are back tomorrow. Thank you for your company, everybody, and Checkpoint's on the way.
Namihi Otiatiahi. This is Checkpoint for the first day of May. I'm Alex Perrottet, in for John Campbell again. On tonight's program, online shopping from overseas is about to get a whole lot more expensive. The government announces plans to collect GST on all online purchases under $400. Extraordinary pictures as heavy rainfall in the Bay of Plenty over the weekend opens up a giant 200-metre long, 20-metre deep sinkhole on a Rotorua farm. A police manhunt continues after a man is killed and a woman seriously injured in South Auckland this morning. Dunavik locals launch a crusade against pee, and Ngaruawahia locals look for an alternative to that problem with the railway bridge. All coming up on Checkpoint after the news headlines.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon. I'm Anna Thomas. Hawkins Construction has been ordered to pay over $13.5 million to the Ministry of Education over its botched build of an Auckland high school. The company built Botany Downs Secondary College in stages between 2003 and 2009 at a cost of $28 million. But problems with the build didn't take long to show. Sally Murphy explains.
The Ministry of Education says 9 of the school's buildings leak due to a host of construction defects, including poorly formed metal roofs, inadequate guttering and poorly formed junctions between walls and eaves in the school's gym. The ministry estimated the cost of repairs to be about $17 million. The company accepted the building suffered problems from poor workmanship, but said the building still complied with the building code. In a High Court decision released today, Hawkins Construction has been ordered to pay nearly $13.5 million plus GST to the ministry. In the decision, Justice Downs says the sum is not small, but students and teachers have not had the benefit of healthy code-compliant buildings for 8 years. In Auckland, Sally Murphy.
It's been revealed that 25 Hawke's Bay families were forced to leave their emergency motel accommodation to make way for tourists attending the Art Deco Festival over the last 2 years. Documents released to RNZ under the Official Information Act showed 10 families had to move for festival goers in mid-February and 15 families were forced to do the same last year. The Ministry for Social Development says those who were moved in 2017 were housed in a Salvation Army church in Flaxmere, a community hall in Napier, or stayed at a marae in Gisborne. The Social Services Secretary for the Salvation Army, Pam Waugh, says it's working closely with the Ministry to prevent this happening again, as it's unsettling for families to be moved about.
When you are vulnerable like this and you're living in crisis accommodation, it's not good to have these upsetting times where you're just out for a few days. So all that we can do to prevent this is being done now.
Major Pam Waugh from the Salvation Army. A new study has revealed the number of children being hospitalised with asthma has nearly doubled. The Massey University study found that in 2016, nearly 690 of every 100,000 children was hospitalised with asthma. That was up 45% on 2002, when the figure was just over 470 children. The report found more than 6,000 children under 15 were admitted to hospital with asthma in 2016. Visitors to the Waitakere and Henua Ranges could face hefty fines of up to $200,000 if they don't comply with new track rules. The closure of most of the Waitakere forest and 10 tracks in the Henua Ranges will be enforced from today and is part of a major effort to slow a disease killing kauri. The spores of kauri dieback disease are spread by soil carried on shoes, and in the last 5 years 20% of kauri in the Waitakere Ranges have been infected. The 23 tracks that remain open will be subject to compulsory hygiene stations and monitoring from Auckland Council control staff. The Council's biosecurity manager Phil Brown says people disobeying the closures or strict disinfection rules could face fines of up to $200,000 or trespass orders. But he says it's unlikely visitors will disobey the rules because they care deeply about preserving kauri trees. A Wellington retailer says enforcing GST on overseas shopping won't level the playing field for all local shops. The government has announced that from October next year, online retailers overseas will have to collect GST on purchases worth less than $400. Shops sending less than $60,000 worth of goods per year to New Zealand will be exempt. Boutique streetwear and fashion store Good as Gold owner Reuben Bryant says that means shops like his overseas and smaller labels are not likely to have to charge the tax.
I'm a boutique, so we're dealing with small brands, and our competition are small brands and small retailers like us overseas. So with this legislation, it doesn't really help us with that competition. It's going to help with the bigger stores from Australia and America and stuff.
Reuben Bryant says he's very happy with the move, which retailers have been waiting for. It's 5:05. The Wallabies halfback Nick Phipps says he's extremely regretful about urinating in a Sydney bar while dressed in a cow suit. Phipps was kicked out of the Willara Hotel for the incident, which happened during his stag party last week. Phipps has already apologised to the pub and says he expects to be sanctioned by the Australian Rugby Union.
I'm a goose. If I'm going to do the crime, I'll definitely pay the time. It's always been sort of my character. I'll stand up and accept the responsibility. I was a bloody idiot, so it's one of those things I wanted to front straight away and get the apology out there and make sure that everyone knows how sorry I am.
Wallabies halfback Nick Phipps. A head-high tackle on All Blacks and Crusaders player Israel Dagg has earned Brumbies winger Chance Penne a 5-week ban. The incident happened during the first half of the Crusaders' win over the Brumbies in Canberra at the weekend. Penne was sin-binned at the time and made several attempts to apologise to Dagg as he lay injured on the ground. The tackle, though, was made worse for Dagg because he landed awkwardly, re-injuring his knee, having only just returned to playing after knee surgery. And the New Zealand mixed martial arts fighter Israel Adesanya has been confirmed to headline an event in the UFC. Undefeated in 13 fights, Auckland-based middleweight Adesanya will face the Ultimate Fighting Championship's 10th ranked fighter in that division, American Brad Tavares, on July 7 in Las Vegas. And that's the news.
Pigs in a forest.
They all had pigs rooting around them, so they're actually damaging the Kauri roots.
Dogs on a bus.
My dog wears a rain jacket, so, you know, there's no shaking in a rain jacket. Look, this is about dog owner responsibility. I want people to like my dog.
And an eagle for Lydia Coe.
You could see the emotional relief when the winning putt went in, that she feels like she's got that nightmare behind her.
Up with the birds. Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Guy and Espina, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, the new research that could lead to improved immune response and reduced side effects for existing vaccines. And after 10, life after death, donating your body to science. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. A few showers, possibly heavy for a time in Northland. Waikato to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and the Central High Country. Mainly fine with cloudy periods. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloudy periods with isolated showers. Wairarapa and Wellington, mainly fine, but there could be a few early showers tomorrow morning. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, also Buller and Westland, cloud increasing this evening, bringing isolated showers, but it should be fine tomorrow. For Otago, Southland and Fiordland, showers this evening, but they should clear. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with rain for a time tomorrow morning. RNZ National, it's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint with Alex Perrottet.
Thanks very much, Anna. Kia ora and good evening. I'm Alex Perrottet, of course, in for John Campbell. Coming up, extraordinary pictures. We want to give you notice about this so you can get online and have a look or follow us and watch on Sky or Freeview or however you'd like to do it. But there are extraordinary pictures of a giant sinkhole which has opened up on a Rotorua farm after the weekend's deluge. But of course we begin with the Amazon tax. The days of being able to buy a pair of shoes or a book from overseas websites free of GST will come to an end in 18 months' time. The government announced today overseas websites will have to collect GST on purchases worth less than $400 from October next year. It says that will level the playing field for New Zealand retailers, despite admitting it will be difficult to police it. Laura Dooney reports.
Shoppers on Wellington streets are less than impressed they'll be paying more for their online purchases from foreign firms soon.
I don't think it's a good idea. I think if we had the ability to buy more of those bits and pieces physically in New Zealand, there wouldn't be any need to go overseas and order them. So I don't think it's fair that you're sort of spending extra on purchases that you're buying online.
I think it will really affect people's shopping in the sense that they will probably limit what they buy online, which I'm not sure whether it's a good thing or not.
I'm not very happy about it at all. I get a lot of collectibles from overseas, which are usually under the $400 threshold. And it's a lot of things that you can't buy here in New Zealand. Penalising you because you can't buy something here and you have to get it overseas by putting a tax on it is extremely unfair.
And some local retailers aren't convinced adding GST will help them. Good as Gold is a boutique clothing store in central Wellington that stocks smaller independent brands, as well as some of the globe's biggest labels. Owner Ruben Bryant says today's announcement is long overdue. But under the government's proposal, offshore retailers selling less than $60,000 worth of goods to New Zealand a year won't be required to register and collect GST.
So any boutique like me and anywhere else in the world selling to New Zealand, which they all are, and every single brand in the entire world has an online store now, they're not sending 60 grand to New Zealand each year. We're only talking about Urban Outfitters, Iconic in Australia, Surf Stitch, Culture Kings, the big online stores overseas. They're the ones who are going to pay GST, which is great. That's fantastic that this has happened, but it's not a level playing field at all.
Just down the road at Unity Books, co-owner Tilly Lloyd is delighted with the news. She says large companies like Amazon and its book depository subsidiary are dominating online sales for ordinary customers.
Who think, God, I'd really love that book, but I don't think I can afford $60. I really, really want it for $30 from Amazon's book depository. You can do that, you just now have to pay the GST, that's all. It's only fair.
Tilly Lloyd says customers who shop locally are being penalised for their support by having to pay GST when others don't. And the Revenue Minister Stuart Nash says making overseas retailers collect GST will make things fairer.
At the moment, there's 26,000 retailers in this country employing about 62,000 people who have an immediate disadvantage because they have got to charge 15% GST, whereas if you buy it offshore, you don't have to pay that 15% GST.
Stuart Nash says suppliers will register voluntarily to collect GST, and those that are credible retailers, about 75%, will comply. That's expected to raise about $53 million in revenue in the first year. However, Mr Nash admits it will be hard to police.
If you don't comply, then in essence you're committing tax avoidance or tax evasion. But it is, it's reasonably hard to police that, but there will be penalties for it.
For Checkpoint, Laura Dooney.
Thanks, Laura. Stuart Nash there saying $53 million in revenue. He's saying that's not the main thing, of course, but it will raise that amount. We'll speak to PwC tax expert Jeff Nightingale a bit later on, just after 6 o'clock tonight. He says it will. He thinks it might even get a whole lot more for the government. Obviously, they're saying that's not the main point. But more on that story a bit later on. Sunday's deluge, which brought 146 millimetres of rain to the Bay of Plenty, has opened up a giant sinkhole on a farm near Rotorua. Colin Tremaine, who manages the Tumunui farm, says the sinkhole, or tomo, which runs along a fault line, is about 200 metres long, 20 metres wide and 20 metres deep. Now, if you're watching us or you're on Checkpoint Facebook page, the pictures are quite extraordinary. I spoke to Colin a short time ago and asked him how the tomo was discovered.
One of my staff getting the cows first thing in the morning in the half light, saw it on the side of the race. He rang me and told me that I looked about 4 metres deep and 20 metres long. I come back down in the daylight and saw it's about 150, 200 metres long and 30 metres wide, 20 metres deep.
And so you're saying you went there earlier in the evening when it was dark, and are you saying
early in the morning?
Early in the morning, and it grew in size by the time you came back, or you just didn't see it properly? You think the first time round?
Didn't see it properly.
Wow. And just let us know: was there any danger, any animals or anything that might have fallen in?
Oh, it's into the race. They could have, but animals are stupid. They know to stay clear. They're walking past it right now.
Right. Now, you know, obviously your farm is on a fault line. You're aware of that. Has anything like this happened before?
That's the 9th tomo on the farm. That's the 9th serious tomo, and basically 9th tomo that's at least 10 metres deep.
And how deep is this one?
20.
So what are you going to do?
Put a fence around it.
And
forget about it.
And that's all you can do?
Oh, wasted time filling it in. Well, there's one around the other side. I was watching it in the rain. There was huge amounts of water going in. It wasn't even filling out with water. It just goes straight out the bottom.
Now, days ago there was just a small pool, a little lake, I suppose, from all the rain on the property. That turned into this massive sinkhole. Are you concerned that, I don't know, there might be more to come?
Oh, I can see there's a crack running 400 or 500 metres. It extends. I know it's going to get bigger.
400 or 500 metres. That's what, right up the property.
Yeah.
And
one hillside down through the valley, up the other hillside.
Does it go through anyone else's property?
No.
Right. And I mean, how heavy was the rain coming down in the last few days then?
It was very heavy. We had 146 mils of rain, basically over that 24-hour period.
And have you spoken to any authorities? Does anyone come to visit to scope it out, to check how dangerous it might be?
No, they haven't. They're looking at the other ones further down on the road. Last year we had a similar one on the roadside. They had to dig the road up because the road was undermined. But I've looked at that one, but not this one in the farmland, no. It'll become another spectacle to look at on the place.
Perhaps something people can come and visit. Particularly GNS scientists, I suppose, will be quite interested in seeing the fault line open up. That would be very interesting.
I'll be very interested to talk to somebody in a bit, because it's interesting looking at the layers of soil 20 metres deep.
That's right, bit like a science lesson.
Pretty much.
Colin Tremaine from Rotorua here. If you were watching, you could see the pictures. If you weren't, you were just tuning in and listening, please go to our Facebook page. Also tune in tomorrow. We're hoping to speak to some GNS scientists, and hopefully Colin won't be standing so close to the edge as we saw in that photo, as I think some of them are saying it could even open up even further. You would have seen the pictures where it narrowed a bit more. There is a possibility of that opening up even more, so we will stay tuned to that. Mangere locals say an area where one person was killed and another seriously injured is a common park-up spot for the homeless and boy racers. The police have launched a homicide investigation after being called to Greenwood Road at about 6 this morning after reports that 2 people were lying on the ground. Now, a 28-year-old man was found dead at the scene and a woman had serious gunshot injuries. A manhunt is underway for 2 men the police believe are responsible. Tom Furley reports.
I arrived here about 6, probably 5:45, and the cops were already in the far corner there of Ascot. They already had armed defenders there. As you can see, their cops been there since 6 o'clock this morning, probably even earlier than that, but they've been there all day.
Matthew Katipa works just round the corner from where the man's body was found this morning in Mangere.
I was quite shocked, because it's quite close to home. All my kids and that, I've got 5 kids, I've got to worry about them. If it didn't happen here, it could happen in the main road,
Throughout the day, a white tent sat on the grass berm on the roadside, while a silver car parked behind was protected by a blue awning. Police cars went in and out of the cordoned road, guarded by an officer with a gun, while staff in boiler suits gathered evidence. Chris Olsen, who lives and works opposite the cordon, was woken by the police helicopter. He says the noise isn't uncommon, and he wasn't surprised to discover something bad had happened.
It's only a matter of time. Yeah, it's that sort of area. It's semi-rural. Yeah, they're going to have to do a bit more policing around this area, I think. There's always things happen. There's alarms going off around here at night, cars racing up and down, after work.
Chris Olsen says people often park up, dump rubbish or drag race down the stretch of road. Another local, who didn't want to be identified, said since moving in last year he's seen boy racers crash into his property and had small bullets fired at his car. Next door, the manager of airport shuttle business Fly Park, Rob Prendergast, says Greenwood Road is a very dark street that is also a common spot for homeless.
People sleep on the road, so you get in the little gateways all the way along there. The people park up on them and sleep the night, and they go early in the morning before you come back, But that's been happening for ages.
Rob Prendergast says when he left work last night, there was a group of around 3 people getting drenched in the rain near where the body was later found.
There was a couple of cars parked about where the tent is. They were outside in the pissing down rain, and that was a bit of a shock to me. So I did think that, and I said that to the other lady when I first got here this morning, that was quite strange to me last night. I didn't take a hell of a lot of notice, mate, because it was pure pan down, but I just thought, I didn't know why.
The police are yet to release details of how the 28-year-old man died. However, they say they're confident it wasn't a random incident. They've spoken with the injured woman, who is being treated for gunshot wounds at Auckland Hospital, and say they are following inquiries to identify 2 men believed to be involved. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
Former addicts talking about trying to jump out of moving cars, and successful rehab stories are driving a grassroots group in a small Tararua town to continue their crusade against P. The anti-P ministry holds weekly walk-in gatherings for people wanting support to quit, or for family members whose loved ones are addicted to methamphetamine. Our reporter Charlie Drever visited Danny Verk and filed this report.
At an alternative therapy store on Danny Verk's main street, a group calling themselves the Anti-P Ministry holds a weekly gathering. Former addict Zane is one of the first to share his story and says the group would have been useful when he was coming off meth.
Your friends will hype you up, and that's mainly the excitement about it. But once you trade all your friends, all your loved ones, all your family, all potential of any relationships or anyone giving a shit about you for your feet around a public toilet, and a dirty little meth pipe with a burnt throat and a sour taste, you may as well just cry yourself to sleep every night. Or quit.
Zane recalls being so desperate he tried to jump out of a speeding car to retrieve his meth pipe that his mate had thrown out the window, and he still bears a physical reminder of his addiction.
Dots all up their legs, scarring from picking over and over again. Just because you just don't like, I don't know, just don't like the fact that there's a bump there or something. You feel that the scab is healed with, you know, some dirty blood, so you pick it off, let it bleed clean, and they just end up doing weird things.
Throughout the morning, a number of people visit, including victims of crime, family members and other former addicts.
If you have any trouble around here or anything, we're here every Friday from 10 to 12. So yeah, just come down and feel free to talk. Yeah, me, Fiona, Michael, or...
Those running this session are an unlikely alliance: a grandmother, a social worker and Brendan Warne, his son and his brother, who's a Black Power member. Mr. Warne and his brother started the drop-in sessions. He's a former gang member himself who once spent his days cooking and selling meth.
We've had over 200 people through here in 6 months, so that's, you know, we've had 2 people in rehab, we've had who have graduated, and we've got others that are going through rehab. We're actually really happy with that.
Mr. Warne's life has changed completely. He's now a religiously ordained minister and is studying social work.
I'm doing mental health and addictions, level 4, so my plan is to go into the jails and help jails. Like, that's the main setback now that's stopping me, is they're saying I don't have all the paperwork, so now I'm about to graduate, so be warned, here I come. There's a lot of people in there that need help, there's a lot of people with mental health issues.
It's a crisp Friday morning in the Tararua town as a drop-in session continues outside the Magical Journey store. I'm here as part of RNZ's Broken Bad project, looking at all aspects of methamphetamine in New Zealand. Social worker Fiona Watson says they've struggled to find a space to hold the sessions because no one wants to deal with P addicts.
I'm quite amazed because there's a lot of empty buildings. Approached a few people and sort of, no, we can't do that. It's only 2 hours a week, for goodness sake. Give us a chance to actually explain to you what it is that we do. We're not having people having psychotic episodes coming up because they're not the ones that will come and talk to us. We just need to be given a chance, really. Look what we've done already.
Miss Watson volunteers her time for the group and freely gives out her private phone number. She says they are making a difference. She didn't even recognise one girl they helped into rehab when she later bumped into her at the supermarket.
I had to have a second take, and when I did, we did connect, I was like, oh, the biggest hug and biggest accolades to her, and she was just beaming. That was wonderful to see.
The group's influence is evident in the town, with their stickers even gracing the local police cars. Senior Sergeant Jamal Glassy says meth addiction is a community problem.
But if there's people out there that are trying to use their initiative to do something about it, and if it's genuine, we need to be able to. They need to know that they've got our support and that we're in behind them and trying to tackle the issues, because we talk about it being a community issue so often, and it is. So therefore, let's not help the community to try and tackle the problem rather than just leaving it for police to do.
Danny Verk is not alone with its meth problem. Many small towns face similar challenges. But an Anti-P Ministry sticker on the Viking sign as you leave the area shows the community is trying to tackle the problem. For Checkpoint, Charlie Drever.
And you would have heard Charlie refer to Broken Bad in that report. That's RNZ's online report, and obviously there are reports going out on a range of our programs. I do encourage you to go online and have a look. Lots of pictures, lots of stories of lots of different people right around the country. It's a big meth problem, and a lot of hard work's gone into that report. rnz.co.nz if you want to read more and hear people's stories there, and put together from a range of RNZ's journalists. Now, in just over half an hour, Ngaruawahia has the chance to finally speak to Kiwi Rail, the Mayor of Waikato, police and councillors all at once to try and iron out a solution to the town's railway bridge problem. People, as we know, have played cat and mouse with trains crossing the bridge for decades. But that ended in tragedy 5 weeks ago when an 11-year-old girl was clipped and lost her life. It followed a 9-year-old boy losing his life in 2002. Now, it seems locals are in a battle. They say use of the bridge is symptomatic of other problems and they want a safe way to jump into their own awa, the Waikato River. But nobody seems to want to provide them with one. Here's Zach Fleming with more.
Hurtling through Ngaruawahia, the train nearly blows us and our tripod over. If we were on the tracks, our lives would have depended on the vigilance of the driver. Anxious not to hit children, this driver last year blasted their horn for 20 seconds before inching across the bridge. But they're going so slow someone hops on the train, riding it for a few seconds before jumping off into the water below.
Oh, look at the idiot.
This is summer in Ngaruawahia, and it's been like this for decades. Yesterday we were in town for just 30 seconds before we saw a man walk along the rail bridge. And there's no reason for him to. A safe pedestrian bridge runs parallel. After the deaths of 2 children, 11-year-old Maureen Ramaka last month and 9-year-old Jaden Tepu in 2002, New Zealand keeps asking Ngaruawahia why. But Ngaruawahia told me yesterday, maybe that's the wrong question.
It's the only thing fun around here for them to do. Yeah.
A lot of kids don't really want to go home around here, but they have to. So that's their hideaway place for the day, because it's safe, you know. People's always around down there, new people to meet.
So for reasons many of us can't relate to, kids grow up playing on the rail bridge, around trains. Maybe asking people who are born and bred here in Ngaruawahia why they're so blasé about trains is like asking a fish how they like the water. Maureen Ramaka was playing with her friends on the bridge just before 6 p.m. on a Sunday 5 weeks ago. She tried to run but was clipped by a train and died at the scene. Locals say the bridge is basically the town's playground. Kids are as scared of trains as they are of monkey bars.
They try and play chicken with the train. Like, we never did that. There was no need to do that because you know you're going to lose against the train, so what's the point?
More than a month on and there's still a big colourful memorial right next to the bridge. There are flowers, Easter eggs, clothes and toys. But also someone has put a stuffed toy in a jar hanging off the fence next to it. And written on the jar it says, "Track Angel Bear, please watch over others who venture near." And there's no if in that sentence. It's an acknowledgement that you can't stop people if they want to cross this bridge or jump off it. KiwiRail has tried. They've put in spiked metal bars on the fence, but actually, if you just walk 20 metres in the other direction, you can get onto the bridge completely unobstructed. Tonight, the Ngaruawahia Community Board is meeting with iwi, KiwiRail, police, the mayor and local councillors to try and flesh out ideas on how another accident can be avoided.
It's not an opportunity to put blame or highlight that we've got a problem. 2 tragedies is enough. It can't be just stopping people from jumping off the train. We've got to have a number of approaches to accommodate both the old school and the new school here in our town.
The old school approach wants an education drive, the new school a platform to facilitate safe jumping.
Teenagers or the ones who jump, adults, they want a platform because they know that it will keep their kids safe, then they don't have to worry as much.
We got an hour there to swim and why not use it? Yeah.
Every idea is a viable idea. We just got to make sure that we do our checks and balances. We've got to do the research, we've got to do the feasibility around that stuff.
Which is a roundabout way of saying a safe platform might cost too much money. KiwiRail won't say whether it will stump up any money if a platform is preferred. Its GM of Network Services, Hanare Clark, said he's just wanting to go to tonight's meeting with as open a mind as possible.
It's where you put it. It's all of those things that need to be considered before, we can say, look, that sounds like a good idea. I think there's got to be some work to be done on the feasibility of it. And safety sits right up there for us, and to promote something that could create more hazards, then it's certainly not something that we would like to do. We're there really just opening with an open mind not having any preconceived ideas on what's going to come out of it.
So no favourite solution that you'd prefer?
Look, not at this stage. I think there's probably a few things that need to be done. I don't think there's a one silver bullet that's going to resolve this.
The driver involved in March's accident is now back at work, receiving ongoing psychological help. Around 200 people are expected at tonight's meeting, all with the common goal of avoiding another accident. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
Coming up on Checkpoint, Dunedin's Fortune Theatre closes its doors. 10 journalists have been killed in Afghanistan in the deadliest day for the country's media since the Taliban was ousted back in 2001. And Victoria University considers dumping its name. Of course, we'd love your feedback, so don't forget you can text us at 2101, whatever's easier for you. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. We're on Facebook, of course, Checkpoint with John Campbell. Email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Always looking forward to what you've got to say and feedback throughout the program. First, of course, here's Anna Thomas with the headlines.
A host of building defects at Auckland's Botany Dance School has led to Hawkins Construction being ordered to pay the Education Ministry more than $13.5 million. The company accepted the buildings suffered problems from poor workmanship, but said they still complied with the building code. In the High Court judgment, Justice Down says the sum is not small, but students and teachers have not had the benefit of healthy code-compliant buildings for 8 years. A Wellington retailer says he's happy with the move to charge GST on goods bought overseas, but it won't level the playing field for all local shops. The government has announced online retailers offshore will have to collect GST on purchases worth less than $400 from October next year. But Ruben Bryant of a boutique streetwear and fashion store Good as Gold says small shops like his overseas aren't likely to have to charge the tax. The Salvation Army is working with the Ministry for Social Development to stop a repeat of families being moved out of emergency motel accommodation to make way for tourists. Some 25 Hawke's Bay families were forced out of their motels during the Art Deco Festival in the past 2 years. Major Pam Waugh says when you're vulnerable, it's not good to have these sorts of upsets. A new study has revealed the number of children being hospitalised with asthma has nearly doubled. The Massey University study found that in 2016, nearly 690 of every 100,000 children was hospitalised with asthma. That was up 45% on 2002, when the figure was just over 470 children. From today, visitors to the Waitakere and Hanua Ranges could face fines of up to $200,000 if they don't comply with new track rules. The closure of most of the Waitakere forest and 10 tracks in the Hanua Ranges is part of major efforts to slow a disease-killing kauri. The 23 tracks that remain open will be subject to compulsory hygiene stations and monitoring by Auckland Council control staff. And that's the news.
Thanks very much, Anna. We're lucky to have Nona Peltier here with us for business news. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much for having me.
And how is ANZ? Because they're saying that what their lending is what, not keeping up with their deposits. So that's probably a good thing, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it means that their profits are quite high and their risks are lower because, of course, you know, things are working out that way, and they produced quite a healthy result. So their first half result was, what is the number? Yeah, up 11% to $964 million. It's quite a good profit. That's a net profit.
That's a net profit.
And that's for the year to end of March. And their revenue was up, 3% to $2.1 billion, which is also quite a good result. Yeah.
Not too bad. We've all been following pretty closely these things over across the ditch. There's a Royal Commission on there. I think we've had at least 2 very high-profile resignations or sackings.
Three with the AMP, and then, of course, the Commonwealth Bank. There was some disgrace there as well for them charging fees to clients who were dead. Yeah. And
the whole revelation is, and admitted straight out or it's not a court, is it? It's a Royal Commission. It's a hearing. But they're saying that consumers were not put first, and obviously shareholders came first, and also they were put in front of the law as well. I mean,
yeah.
Are there any rumblings here? What's the reaction here on the ground?
There have been some rumblings here, but you know, the thing is, we have covered the story for a while now. The bank regulators, the market regulators have all said that there's been nothing that they can report. We've spoken to banking industry people. They've said there's nothing emerging here. And when I spoke with the chief executive of the ANZ New Zealand Bank today, he affirmed that. He said, look, we haven't had anything but like a few complaints here and there, but nothing to do with the kinds of things that have emerged at the Royal Commission in Australia into the banking sector. So I think that this is a story that's going to unfold for many months to come. But for now, the ANZ New Zealand Bank is saying that they are operating above board in line with New Zealand's regulations. And there is nothing like that in their books that they need to be ashamed of, that's for sure.
Okay, good. That's good news. I think there's more good news with building consents going up. That's the highest level in 14 years. So
yeah, well,
where's the growth coming from?
Attached properties, so not houses. And it's interesting, of course, building consents are not actual buildings. They're just intentions to build, right?
Sure.
And
we're going to see a lot of them in the years to come.
Yes, we're going to see. Unfortunately, almost all of the change, in fact, has been for consents for attached dwellings, which are basically apartment buildings, townhouses, and those types of properties that are not standalone houses. The growth in standalone houses is pretty much unchanged over the period before, but since June 2004, we are now at the highest seasonally adjusted rate of new consents for dwellings. Almost all of that is as a result of those attached dwellings, and 3 of the big properties that are being developed are here in Auckland. In Wellington, though, there was a 76% increase, again, attached dwellings. Wow. So really fascinating. So I think that reflects what we have seen in other other surveys that we've seen, that people are starting to look at apartments as a place that they are willing to live in. The Real Estate Institute's last month's figures noted that there had been a drop in the average price of Auckland properties, and that's mostly because people were buying the more or less expensive apartments, which also, if they're new, attract a lower LVR, so you can get into them at a lower down payment, 10%.
Obviously makes them more attractive, but
yeah.
But it's still interesting, isn't it? Because you wouldn't have thought that so quickly we would change our minds about living in apartments rather than houses. We're still very much in a house economy.
I don't know. I live in an apartment.
Oh, well,
I don't own a car. I just rent.
You're doing your bit.
I'm doing my bit to keep it that way.
Tell us about the markets. How are they going?
Well, what do we have here? The top 50 index, it actually fell 8 points to 8,436, which is in contrast to what was happening in Australia, where their shares are doing quite well, up 0.5%, the ASX 200 over there. And that's because the Americans have kind of made a trade deal with tariffs and so on, and sort of backed off a bit, so the Asia market looks a little bit better. New Zealand, not so much. But however, 8 points down, that's not much. Dollar is steady, 70.4 US, 93.3 Australian, and 51.1 pence.
Thanks very much. Nona Peltier there with the business update and the markets update. Thanks as always for your expertise there. Where are we going next? I think we're going to Dunedin, to the theatre. Okay. 44 years and 400 shows, the curtains come down for the final time at Dunedin's Fortune Theatre. 11 staff got the news that they would lose their jobs this morning, and the theatre stops operating immediately, leaving the Lower South Island without a professional theatre. The board chair says the problem was simple: not enough people were going to the shows. Rachel Graham has more.
The chair of the Fortune Theatre's Board of Trustees, Hayley Van Leeuwen, says over the last year to 18 months, they've undergone exhaustive reviews to try and find a model that would work. But they have reluctantly come to the conclusion that it is no longer financially viable. She says the problem was a lack of ticket sales, and though they have sought more support from their funders, such as the Dunedin City Council, more funding wasn't going to solve the problem.
What we've recognised some time ago is that no matter how much money gets pumped into us in the terms of funding, the level of ticket sale revenue is not enough to keep us sustainable. So what we did not want to be doing is going back to our funders and asking for more of their funds when we knew that we were plugging holes versus building something towards the future.
She says one issue was the inflexibility of the historic venue, the former Trinity Methodist Church, which didn't allow them to increase seats when they had successful shows, such as the recent adaptation of the Iliad. Ms Van Leeuwen says the 11 staff knew there was financial issues, but some were still stunned at today's news.
My business brain sees this as a very clear-cut decision, and it's we can put the line in the sand and say, look, we're not being responsible with our funders' money, and so therefore we should not be operating. But the human brain in me says, is absolutely devastated that we've had to make 11 human beings redundant. It's a horrible feeling.
Actor and director Miranda Harcourt got her start in the business at the Fortune Theatre. She's shocked and devastated the whole lower South Island is now left without a professional theatre.
It's also devastating because the Fortune has always, since 1974 when it first came into being, it's always been out there on the edge, commissioning new work and really pushing New Zealand performing arts culture forward. And there is no better example of that than the recent commission from Jonathan Hendry, the artistic director, of Michael Hurst and iconic Dunedin musician Shane Carter doing their adaptation of the Iliad.
These Dunedin residents were equally sad at the news.
We are very disappointed. It's always sad to hear theatres going under. Obviously we know people, Dunedin's a small place and we know some of the workers there, so very sad for that.
Quite gobsmacked, well, to tell you the truth. I can't express how I feel about it because it's terrible. I know young actors who have gone through there, and that'll be a real blow for them.
Oh, I just think it's disappointing for Dunedin. Yeah, it's a great venue. I haven't been in a while, to be fair, but I think it's a fabulous place and good for the arts and craft, of Dunedin.
Hayley Van Leeuwen says by shutting today, the theatre will at least be able to pay out all of their workers. She says the Fortune Theatre closes today as a business, but a decision on dissolving the trust will be made at the trust AGM later this month. For Checkpoint, Rachel Graham.
25 homeless families in Hawke's Bay have been forced to leave their emergency motel accommodation to make way for tourists attending the Art Deco Festival over the last 2 years. Documents released to RNZ under the Official Information Act show 10 families had to shift for festival goers in mid-February and 15 families were forced to do the same last year. Now, the Ministry of Social Development says those moved last year were housed in church and community halls in Napier and Hastings or stayed on Marae in Gisborne. Our Hawke's Bay reporter Anusha Bradley has more.
Last year's Art Deco Festival coincided with the Matatini National Kapahaka Championships, creating an accommodation crisis for many homeless living in emergency motel accommodation. Some of the 15 families who were moved stayed at the Salvation Army's church hall in Flaxmere. The Social Services Secretary for the Salvation Army, Major Pam Waugh, says although the families were grateful for a place to stay, it's unsettling for them to be moved about.
When you are vulnerable like this and you're living in crisis accommodation, it's not good to have these upsetting times where you're just out for a few days. So all that we can do to prevent this is being done now.
In February this year, 10 homeless families had to leave their emergency motel accommodation for Art Deco weekend. The MP for Ikaroa Rāwhiti, Meka Whaitiri, says it's unacceptable it happened again.
I don't want next year coming around and we're having to do this again. I'll be working hard to make sure that both MSD, with my colleagues, MSD and all the agencies, that we are either getting people either into sustainable or affordable homes, that we've got state houses up and running. Clearly we need to do more, but it's a start.
The Social Development Ministry's Chief Executive of Housing, Scott Gallagher, says he can't promise it won't happen again.
Given that the demand is increasing, it's very difficult for us to absolutely guarantee that we may not need to think about moving families.
Hawke's Bay is not the only region where big events put pressure on accommodation for the homeless. In March, families in Whangarei were cast out of their emergency accommodation as 660 fans flooded the city for a concert. It's also happened in Auckland and Nelson. But Scott Gallagher says the ministry now books out motels well in advance around the country, and he's confident that in Hawke's Bay, an increase in social housing will help lessen the chance of the problem reoccurring.
We're probably having a greater sense of confidence that what we've had to experience in the last 12 or so months with the likes of the Art Deco, that everything we're doing to more than quadruple the transitional housing places in Napier and Hastings, all of what we are doing to increase the supply is trying to absolutely minimise any further examples where we're having to shift people out of motels.
Pam Moore from the Salvation Army says it's also working closely with the ministry to place people in alternative accommodation in the first place if they know a motel is booked out for an event during their stay. The ministry says clients will know weeks in advance if they do have to move, and they aren't aware of anyone who did not have a place to go to during the Art Deco Festival this year. In Napier for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
The Vatican's treasurer and Australia's most senior Catholic, Cardinal George Pell, has been committed to stand trial on sexual offence charges. Today's ruling follows a month-long committal hearing in March, which decides whether there's enough credible evidence to justify a trial. The Cardinal was facing multiple accusations of historical offences from a number of complainants and vigorously defended all of them. We must note, of course, the magistrate threw out more than half the charges, ruling they were just not credible. The BBC's Hugh Griffiths was at the court in Melbourne earlier today.
Magistrate Belinda Wallington said that Australia's most senior Catholic will face a jury for some alleged offences, but interestingly, the magistrate did throw out more than half of the original charges, including some of the most serious allegations made against Cardinal George Pell, apparently due to insufficient evidence. And when asked to enter a plea, Cardinal Pell said in a clear and a loud voice, "Not guilty." Some of the complainants during this 4-week trial gave their evidence in private sessions at the Magistrates' Court in Melbourne. That is standard practice in these types of cases. Some of their evidence does remain confidential, but we did learn some of the allegations or some details about certain allegations. Cardinal George Pell is accused of offending at Melbourne's St Patrick's Cathedral in the late 1990s when he was Archbishop of Melbourne. He's also accused of committing sexual offences at a swimming pool and a cinema when he was a priest in the 1970s. But more specific details of these alleged offences have been kept secret because of various legal directions ordered by the magistrate. What happens next is that the Cardinal will face a hearing in Victoria's County Court when a trial date will be set, and we're expecting that hearing to take place as soon as Wednesday.
Hugh Griffiths in Melbourne. Cardinal Pell has entered formal pleas of not guilty to all the charges. Now, 10 journalists have been killed in Afghanistan in the deadliest day for the country's media since the Taliban was ousted in 2001. In Kabul, a total of 26 people were killed in 2 separate suicide bomb attacks. Now, the bomber appeared to have deliberately targeted journalists presenting a press card to police before joining the group standing near the first blast site. The BBC's Lebor Deseko reports.
They came to bury a brother, husband and a friend. A father of 6 whose only daughter was born just this month. For many others, Shah Marai was a fearless veteran photojournalist for the French press agency AFP, who covered the turbulent events in his country for 22 years. This is the aftermath of the attack where he was killed, one of 9 journalists killed in twin attacks in Kabul. The Islamic State group said it carried out the suicide bombings. The reporters and cameramen had been at the scene to report on an earlier attack when they were killed in the second blast. It is the deadliest assault on the Afghan media for decades.
A bomber on foot who was reportedly having a camera in his hand, he approached journalists, and that's where he detonated his explosive device, and that was such a deliberate attack against journalists.
In a separate incident, the BBC journalist Ahmed Shah was shot in Khost province in the east of the country. He was 29 years old and engaged to be married.
I think everyone at the BBC today is thinking about Ahmed Shah's family, of course, and his close friends and colleagues at our BBC News Afghan services, both in Kabul, in Khost and here in London.
And in yet more bloodshed, 11 school children were killed in the province of Kandahar. A suicide bomber had been trying to hit a NATO convoy. No one's claimed that attack as yet. There's been a wave of militant attacks in the past few months, despite the government offering peace talks to the Taliban. And with elections due later this year, many fear what more terror might await the people of this country.
Lebor Desekal reporting. It seems it's become the new normal for people there in Afghanistan, particularly Kabul, with those suicide attacks, and this one obviously in particular coordinated to target journalists. So we'll keep an eye on developments there in the aftermath of that bloody attack. Now, Budget Day, we're moving on. I think it's coming up, isn't it? May 17, I think, might be the Budget Day. Jacinda Ardern's government might be about to unveil its very first one. But it seems the traditional pre-budget rituals are going to remain the same. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, has delivered a preemptive defence of the budget in a speech this morning. He's confirmed there'll be a surplus, but he's warned it will just be laying the foundations. That's seen the opposition sharpen its lines of attack ahead of May 17. And here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The government's already pulled back on its promise to fully implement a $10 reduction in the cost of GP visits from the 1st of July, blaming National for larger than expected health deficits. That was the first target of the National leader Simon Bridges as he faced off against the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern when Parliament resumed after a 2-week recess today.
From 1 July, will it be $10 cheaper for New Zealanders to visit their GP?
Mr Speaker, I can confirm that we will be making GPs visits cheaper over the course of our term, particularly given that under the last government, GP costs increased by 44%.
Mr Bridges then asked about the government's priorities.
Is one of the reasons for the doubt about the $10 reduction because the government's chosen to prioritise a whole host of other things, including $2.8 billion in student-free fees that don't deliver any more students?
Mr Speaker, no. What we have had to do is make sure that we can address the fact that DHBs have had a 6-fold increase in their deficit from September to date. Over $190 million deficit. We've got hospitals that are not fit for purpose.
This was a culmination of statements made by both leaders through the day as the government sought to justify scaling back on the GP visits and National to vindicate the state the economy was in when it left office. Neither Jacinda Ardern nor the Minister David Clark would confirm an extra $2 billion a year would be committed to health, Labour's election campaign promise. But Dr Clark was happy to lay the blame for potentially a more limited budget at National's feet.
In health, we've inherited a challenging situation with growing deficits. And I think more broadly, we need to look at the bigger picture, which is that we have 3 budgets to deliver as a coalition government. You don't afford everything in one budget, and I think the public understand that. We've got to step through the commitments we've made so that over the course of our term we meet all of those commitments.
Should we expect more phasing in health?
Look, you'll see phasing across every portfolio.
Simon Bridges denies National left any nasty surprises when it handed over to the coalition government.
I mean, the books were there for everyone to see. I mean, we have financial responsibility legislation in this country that makes quite clear where things are at. They knew that. They actually know they've got a lot of money. They got $10 billion more in borrowing. They've got more revenue. They're putting on taxes, and yet they sort of somehow can't make that work. Well, that's because they overpromised.
Mr Bridges also rubbishes any suggestion National should take any responsibility for this government's budget, including the impact of DHB deficits.
Well, my understanding is they're less than they were when we came in. But look, what is it? $200 million. Now, I'm not saying that's insignificant, but it's in a nearly $17 billion a budget for health. And it's in a time when they've got $10 billion more coming in from borrowing, when they've got $500 million more coming in from additional revenue. They can do these things. It's about prioritising.
The Finance Minister Grant Robertson has confirmed this budget will deliver a surplus and in following years. He also says the government will stick to its budget responsibility rules, including getting debt down to 20% of GDP by 2022.
Oh, look, I think it's really important for New Zealand that we are in a position to withstand external shocks. You know, we are, relative to the rest of the world, a small economy. We have a higher level of risk to manage than other economies do, and as a result, our debt levels need to be lower. So there is a substantive reason behind this. We will, in the course of this term, obviously be borrowing, significant amounts of money to do the things we want to do.
Grant Robertson says a wholesale review of government policies and programs will free up $700 million of new money. Along with those savings, he says plans to crack down on tax dodgers and new property taxes will generate $1.4 billion over 4 years. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Now we go back to Rotorua, where the flooding has impacted so many people. When the biggest rainfall in more than 50 years struck Rotorua on Sunday morning, John Healy and his wife were out. The couple returned home around 3 p.m. to find their Nongnotaha home so deep in water it came up to John's armpits. He and his wife, like many other Bay of Plenty residents, were left with only the clothes they were standing in. Our producer Bridget Burke spoke to John and his son today as the scale of the damage was only just beginning to sink in.
Within a quarter of an hour, we were virtually knee-deep in water, so we were told to get out of the house, or some neighbours came across and told to get out. So we got out of the house, and then when we came back the following morning, there was a tide mark on the front door that was, well, about 1.5 meters up. And that's then realisation was coming that the house was going to be in a mess. But I honestly never expected to see anything like that in my house. You know, you see it on television where there's been major flooding, and you think, oh, I would hate to be in a position where I saw the carpets floating down the road. But, you know, we know what it's like now. We've seen, well, we didn't see it, but we've seen the result of furniture swimming down the hallway anyway.
Can you describe, John, what it was like opening that front door? Were you there with your wife when you went back?
No, we wouldn't let the wife go on. I was there with my son. We couldn't open the front door for a starter because all furniture was piled up against it. So we had to really push it open to get in. And then we saw bedroom furniture in the hallway, and then we went into the carpets were brown instead of it was a grey colour, proper colour, but this was a muddy brown. And you know, you just see your settee, which is an L-shaped one. It's a 3 metres by 2 metre L-shaped settee, and that one end had floated up and it landed on a table. And you know, you can't imagine it. You know, it's just, you don't believe it, and it doesn't really sink in. The china cabinet, that had stayed still, but the doors had been forced open. All the china had been spewed out, and we'd got some quite expensive china.
How much have you told your wife about the damage?
Oh, she's seen it now. She's packing up all the china. When she drove up in the daughter-in-law's car, I said, it's worse than you can possibly, it's worse than I ever imagined. So I forewarned her to a certain extent, and she could see in the garage at that time, and there was, you know, all the we've got a big bookcase in the garage that's got all the books, but that had been covered, so you can imagine what the books are like. Fortunately, we've saved quite a lot of the photographs and that sort of thing, but we've had the assessors in today, and it's going to be a major refit. All the gym boards got to come off. Fortunately, we've got metal framing, so we haven't got to wait for the house to dry out.
You've fortunately got your son Dave, whom you've been staying with.
Yep.
Am I able to talk to him?
Yeah, he's still throwing things into a skip.
How's it going?
Dave, can you just describe to me what the situation is like there?
Well, I mean, luckily we've had a heap of people coming to offer to help, but I mean, until the insurance only turned up this morning, so until they came, we didn't really want to touch anything because we didn't want to, you know, shit, you don't want to go throwing something away and then they say they don't cover it or whatever. But it's just, you know, where do you start? It's like we've got like every single bit of furniture, bed and all that has all got to be biffed out. So, I mean, shit, I don't know. I haven't been through this before, so I don't know. Do you just chuck it on the side of the road and the council take it away, or does the insurance take it? Do they bring skips? We're just kind of dealing with that.
Where are they going to put the furniture and things to dry out in the meantime?
No, it's all got to get biffed. It's all done. I think we've found one table and two tables and one kind of chest of drawers that we can keep.
That's heartbreaking. That's some of their treasures they've brought out from England, yeah?
Yeah, I know, but I mean, it is what it is. It's only possessions that the end of the day, I was thinking if this had happened in the middle of the night, that would have been, in pitch black. They would have never, they would have struggled to get out. Flipping because it came out so quick,
That's Nongataho resident John Healy and his son Dave speaking to our producer Bridget Burke. You will be pleased to know John is insured. Of course, more coming up after the news.
Radio New Zealand News at 6 o'clock. Good evening. I'm Anna Thomas. Hawkins Construction has been ordered to pay over $13.5 million to the Ministry of Education over its botched build of an Auckland high school. The company built Botany Downs Secondary College in stages between 2003 and 2009 at a cost of $28 million. The Ministry of Education says 9 of the school's buildings leak from many construction defects, including poorly formed metal roofs, inadequate guttering and poorly formed junctions between walls and eaves in the school's gym. The ministry estimates the cost of repairs to be about $17 million. The company accepted the buildings suffered problems from poor workmanship, but says they still complied with the building code. In a High Court decision released today, Hawkins Construction has been ordered to pay nearly $13.5 million plus GST to the ministry. Justice Downs says the sum is not small, but students and teachers have not had the benefit of healthy code-compliant buildings for 8 years. The Ministry for Social Development says it can't guarantee homeless families in Hawke's Bay won't be moved out of emergency motel accommodation for big events in the future. Documents released to RNZ show 25 families were forced to leave their emergency motel accommodation to make way for tourists attending the region's Art Deco Festival over the last 2 years. The MP for Ikaroa Rāwhiti, Meka Whaitiri, says it's unacceptable it's happened for 2 years in a row. The Social Development Ministry, Scott Gallacher, says it's now advanced booking motels and increasing social housing, but it can't promise it won't happen again.
Given that the demand is increasing, it's very difficult for us to absolutely guarantee that we may not need to think about moving families.
Scott Gallacher from the Social Development Ministry. Visitors who disobey new track rules in Waitakere and Hanua Ranges could face heavy penalties of up to $200,000. The closure of most of the Waitakere forest and 10 tracks in the Hanua Ranges will be enforced from today and is part of a major effort to slow a disease killing kauri. The spores of kauri dieback disease are spread by soil carried on shoes. And in the last 5 years, 20% of kauri in the Waitakere Ranges have been infected. The 23 tracks that remain open will be subject to compulsory hygiene stations and monitoring from Auckland Council control staff. The Council's Biosecurity Manager, Phil Brown, says people disobeying the closures or strict disinfection rules could face fines of up to $200,000 or trespass orders.
Between those two powers, we've got a suite of tools that we can use to enforce the closure. But the primary thing is around trying to encourage Aucklanders to voluntarily comply and to support them to comply so that we're not having to go down any enforcement route.
Phil Brown. After 121 years, Victoria University of Wellington is considering a name change. The university could become the University of Wellington to avoid confusion with other universities around the world with a similar name. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
There are Victoria Universities in Melbourne, Toronto, Uganda and Bangladesh, a University of Victoria in Canada and various Victoria colleges around the world. The New Zealand institution, Victoria University of Wellington, says this is leading to confusion, and international analysis shows its research and teaching isn't being as well recognised overseas as it should be. In fact, it says the achievements of its staff and students can be attributed to other institutions and countries. It says the clarity of the university's name is important, and it's considering whether a change is needed. Ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
The Nelson police say a woman found dead in a hotel last Friday was Swiss national Yang Ming. The 62-year-old was found dead in a room of Nelson's Rutherford Hotel, and a 62-year-old man was later charged with murder. The police say Yang Ming knew the man, who has been remanded in custody without plea until next month. Australia's most senior Catholic priest, Cardinal George Pell, is to stand trial on sexual offence charges. Today's ruling follows a month-long committal hearing in March. The Cardinal faces multiple charges of historical sex assault offences from a number of complainants. He has vigorously denied all charges. An abuse survivor and advocate for victims, Phil Nagel, said outside the Melbourne Magistrates Court he's relieved a decision has been made.
Very excited. I mean, it's a very historic day today that, obviously the judge thinks that the Cardinal does have some claims that need to be dealt with, and it's now been referred over to a judge and a jury.
Phil Nagel, Australian sex abuse survivor advocate. It's 6:05. Long-serving swimming coach Jan Cameron is being mourned in both New Zealand and Australia. A former Olympic and Commonwealth medalist for Australia, Cameron died suddenly at her home in Queensland yesterday, aged 70. Cameron was regarded as the driving force behind New Zealand swimming's first high-performance program after moving here in 1991. Swimming New Zealand's Chief Executive Steve Johns says Cameron had a blunt personality and a bloody-minded drive to get the best out of her athletes.
The people who know Jan would probably say that sometimes she had a bit of a blunt personality, but that's the way that she was, and that's the way that she was able to get success out of her swimmers. Was always thinking about the next program, the next event, the next swimmer, and she was just completely 100% driven to achieving success.
Swimming New Zealand Chief Executive Steve Johns. Tottenham Hotspur have beaten Watford 2-0 to cement their place in the top four of English football's Premier League. The win puts fourth-placed Spurs 5 points clear of Chelsea with 3 games remaining and within a point of Liverpool, who have 2 matches left in the race for Champions League spots. And a leading South African sports lawyer has quit his position on a committee of the governing body of international athletics, slamming a controversial new rule believed to target gold medal-winning South African runner Caster Semenya. After the IAAF last week announced it would ban women with naturally occurring high levels of testosterone from specific events, Professor Steve Cornelius says that, in good conscience, he cannot continue in his role. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Nick Bollinger samples the latest from Hamilton-raised US-based Kimbra. We have a window on the world of Colin Powell, one-time leader of the US Armed Forces. And our native fish geek Stella McQueen wants to talk about the semi-vegetarian grayling, the only native fish to ever get official protection. Not that it saved it. No one's seen any for decades.
And between 10 and 11 p.m, join me, Karen Hay, for Lately. We'll be focusing on the events of the day, both nationally and internationally, and talking to the newsmakers in an eclectic mix that covers everything from the arts to politics to live events. That's Lately with Karen Hay in the 10 p.m. hour, weeknights on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. A few showers, possibly heavy for a time in Northland. Waikato to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and the Central High Country, mainly fine with cloudy periods. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloudy periods with isolated showers. Wairarapa and Wellington, mainly fine, but there could be a few early showers tomorrow morning. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, also Buller and Westland, cloud increasing this evening, bringing isolated showers, but it will be fine tomorrow. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, showers this evening, but they should clear, and for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with rain for a time tomorrow morning. RNZ National, it's 6:08, and you're listening to Checkpoint with Alex Perrottet.
Thanks very much, Anna. Anna Thomas there with the news. Great to join you. Checkpoint normally with John Campbell. Tonight, Alex Perrottet standing in. And of course, we're always enjoying getting your feedback. It's always good to know people are actually listening and also engaging with us. 2101 is the text. And of course, there's email and Twitter and all sorts of other ways that you can get in touch with us. We stream online. You can check it out on our website, on Facebook, YouTube even. Of course, there's lots of ways to tune in to Checkpoint. Visitors to 2 of Auckland's favourite nature playgrounds, the Waitakere and Hunua Ranges, can now expect to see wire fences blocking routes, new caution signs and compulsory hygiene stations at track openings. The closure of most of the Waitakere forest and 10 tracks in the Hunua Ranges will be enforced from today, and it's part of major efforts to slow a disease-killing kauri. The Minister for Primary Industries has also issued a strict cleansing and monitoring guideline across the remaining forest and open tracks. Eva Corlett filed this report.
So if you are going to a track that is open, it's compulsory that you use one of these cleaning stations.
That's Glenn Brown from the Arataki Centre in the Waitakere Ranges.
To remind yourself and to keep it really simple, it's about stop, scrub and spray. So when you arrive, make sure you clean all the soil off your feet, so give them a really good scrub with the equipment provided, and then make sure you spray them with the biodegradable disinfectant, and that'll kill any of the remaining spores.
He is demonstrating one of the new compulsory hygiene stations at the entrance of the Lookout track near Arataki Centre. It is one of just 23 of 172 tracks in the Waitakere Ranges that will remain open. The spores of Kauri dieback disease are spread by soil carried on shoes, and in the last 5 years, 20% of Kauri in the Waitakere Ranges have been infected. Everyone entering and leaving tracks will have to disinfect their shoes. Covering more than 16,000 hectares, it's the largest conservation effort in the country. One Titirangi man, Bjarke Bak-Nielsen, is an avid walker and says the closures will be a loss.
It's a wonderful way to enjoy the nature out here. Whether you run or bike it or walk it, it's always beautiful. And I think it inspires you to preserve it whenever you're out in it.
Auckland Council says 14 new control officers who are ecologists will man both open and closed tracks during daylight hours 7 days a week to ensure visitors are complying with the new rules. Anyone caught willfully disobeying the rules could face a hefty fine of up to $200,000 or a trespass order. The chair of the Environment and Community Committee, Councillor Penny Hulse, says the chances of penalties are small because the public cares enough about kauri trees. And she says the council won't be able to police every track.
The more people out patrolling tracks, the more it costs, and I personally would rather that money was spent on pest control and improving the track conditions. So, our wonderful staff are finding that balance.
Councillor Hulse says the council will review security measures every few months. The council's biosecurity manager, Phil Brown, says council expects to see a 90% reduction in people on closed tracks in the Waitakere Ranges.
We know that we're not going to keep every person out of every track, but we do think that the level of compliance we expect to see will be good for kauri forest, both in the Waitakere Ranges but also outside, because one of our focuses, of course, is around reducing the spread out of the Waitakere Ranges and into other places that don't have the disease yet, such as the Hunua Ranges.
Mr Brown says officers are still likely to be present over the long term. The council says other tracks will start to reopen once maintenance on the tracks brings them up to the new standards. I Waitakere mo te hōtako te ahiahi nei, ko Eva Colette tēnei.
Now, the Executive Manager of the Te Kawaro Iwi Tribal Authority and Settlement Trust, Edward Ashby, says it's working closely with Auckland Council. He says the rahui over the wider forested area of the Waitakere Ranges still stands. Now, the iwi is still urging people to stay out of the forest altogether if they have to visit, so you can keep that in mind. And they say people should stick to the kauri safe tracks and, of course, ensure that you have very clean boots. New Zealand retailers might be cheering the expansion of GST on all online purchases, but a tax expert is warning that it is unlikely to result in a massive growth for local shops. The government intends to have overseas websites collect GST on purchases worth less than $400. This is from October next year, that's October 2019. The National Party won't oppose the change, but it says when it was in government, it was advised that lowering the GST threshold wasn't worth the effort and probably the expense. PwC tax partner Jeff Nightingale says while the move aims to correct the unfair advantage enjoyed by overseas retailers, it won't be a salve for old-fashioned shops who haven't got much of an online presence. I asked him what this government will need to do to enforce the policy efficiently.
The previous government got themselves to the point where it needed to happen and then got a bit tangled up in how you go about collecting it. But to be fair to them, the discussion document they put out in July 17 has basically been picked up and executed on by the Labour coalition. And so it is an example of kind of, general cross-party agreement. And the one benefit that I suspect that this government has over the previous government is they've watched the collection of GST on online digital imports, which is a similar system of voluntary registration by the offshore supplier, and that's been quite successful. A larger number than expected have registered and more GST has been collected than expected. And so based on that precedent, they're saying, well, we think we can make this work for goods as well.
Do you know, though, what the mechanism might be, without getting too complicated about things? But, I mean, we do have some big organisations around the world that even warned Australia when it was thinking of doing this, and they're going to bring theirs in, I think, July this year. And we're following suit, and it won't be here until another 18 months, more or less. I think it's October 2019. But what's the mechanism, and what about those warnings? At the time, eBay sent a warning to Australia that this is going to be a problem. Might there be some big organisations around the world that just say, look, it's not worth it in terms of sending things to New Zealand, and that could backfire maybe on retailers, on buyers here?
Yep, I think that is a risk, but I think that risk is probably lessened over the last 12 to 18 months. And it lessens again by the way that the government's proposing to collect this. So they're basically going to make it very simple to register, and an offshore supplier will only really account for their sales. They can choose to worry about their costs and their inputs on GST, but if they've got no touch points, no New Zealand GST costs, all they have to do is put 15% on their sales and electronically register into the New Zealand Inland Revenue and fire it in. So it'll be quite easy to comply with. And yes, it's harder for the New Zealand government to enforce because it's all happening offshore and it's effectively voluntary from an international law perspective. But most of the large trading platforms and large goods businesses are showing a propensity to cooperate and register because they do want to do business, they do want to access the markets, and they do want to be seen as good taxpayers. So I think it's got a pretty high chance of working.
Now, finally, about cost. Stuart Nash made it very clear this morning that this was not about revenue raising, it was about fairness and applying that GST rule across the board. He says it'll raise around about $50 million a year. The question is, what will it cost to implement this? I mean, is it a waste of time at the end of the day trying to chase these small amounts from what are going to be ultimately lots of small retailers around the world? Do you have any idea of the cost that's going to be involved here?
No, it's very hard to estimate, but I actually think the costs will be proportionately quite low because the technology involved to register will be very straightforward. The platforms, the sellers of these low-value goods around the world, they're having to set up digital technology platforms to collect this GST for other countries or VAT or sales tax. I don't think it's a big job to do that. I suspect the Minister's revenue projections are low. The 50 million, I think, my sense, and it's a sense, but I think that's low. I think they'll collect a lot more than that. And the other thing is to worry about is the trend of where this is going. As our Kiwis' online shopping is growing by about 35% a year, I think, year on year. So the trend is that revenue loss at the moment and future revenue from GST on this could grow or should grow.
And that's what I was going to ask you on finally, actually, is what about this call that this is going to stimulate growth for local retailers? Are we going to see that pretty immediately once this kicks in, October next year?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say it would stimulate growth. I think it's an important change that levels the playing field to some extent, that will allow local retailers to compete more fairly, but they will still be under pressure from online shopping. There's a whole lot of other reasons people do online shopping, convenience, a wider range of choice, getting access to stuff they can't get from bricks and mortar retailers in New Zealand. So this won't change the dial dramatically, but it does cure an obvious unfairness and anomaly, and so it will be welcomed by them, but I don't think it's going to lead to a massive growth.
That's Jeff Nightingale there from PwC. Now, it seems there are too many Victorias, universities, that is. Victoria University of Wellington is considering dumping the name of the former monarch and becoming the plain old University of Wellington. I suspect there might be a few University of Wellingtons around as well. Anyway, it seems there are too many institutions with a similar name, and it's often being confused with Melbourne's Victoria University. The university's Vice-Chancellor Grant Guilford told our education correspondent John Gerritsen the university needs a more distinctive name.
We've worked out that the Victoria element of our name is not distinctive on the world stage.
So what that means is that our work is regularly attributed to other universities bearing our name. There's about 6 other Victoria universities in the world. Our name is confusing people. Our staff use about 8 different variants of that name when they're recording their work and publications and the like.
Okay, have you got a name in mind already?
Well, what we're looking at is just a simplification of the name. So at the moment we are Victoria University of Wellington, and what we're thinking about is whether we should be University of Wellington.
Yeah, and how will you go about this process? Is this something that people will have a say on? Are you open to other suggestions?
Yeah, so we're certainly having a wide discussion with staff at the moment, which has just started today, with our alumni and, of course, with students and the management teams of the university. We're working through that process now, and we hope to do so over the course of the next few months and ultimately make a decision.
That's Grant Guilford there speaking to our education correspondent John Gerritsen. Now to a story that we had and featured highly last night. It generated a lot of feedback. BP's fuel pricing tactics on the Kapiti coast. It's outraged motorists. It was losing sales in Otaki, where prices were 20 cents a litre higher than nearby towns. But rather than make Otaki fuel cheaper, an internal email leaked to Stuff and made public yesterday revealed it planned to hike prices in the other towns, hoping other companies would follow its lead. But what's going on elsewhere in the country? We sent today our regional reporters in Nelson, New Plymouth and Whangarei on a mission to drive 40 kilometres, the same distance from Paraparaumu to Levin, to look at the difference in petrol prices. Our Taranaki reporter Robin Martin collated this report.
The traditional starting point for many a Taranaki road trip is the BP on Powderham, so that's where I headed first, and as you'll hear, I needed to.
Yeah, well, before we can start this mission out towards the south of New Plymouth, driving down State Highway 3 towards Wellington, we actually need some gas. So we've pulled over at the BP on Powderham, and looks like there's a pretty good deal going here today. It's $1.92.9, so $1.93 a litre, and diesel is 122.9, so 123. So time to tank up. How you doing? Pump 6, thanks.
Oh yeah. With RNZ's bank balance just that little bit lighter, it was time to hit the road.
Okay, so we've just pulled up at the intersection of Courtney Street and Elliott Street. That's the lead on to the main drag out of town towards Wanganui, State Highway 3, and we're parked at the lights across from the Caltex. 194.9, so 195 a litre for 91. Pulling round now onto Elliott Street, State Highway 3. On our right is the mobile station, 196.9 for 91, and talk to you soon. We've just pulled up at the rural fuel gas station at Egmont Village, about 6 or 7 kilometres to the south of New Plymouth. Today we've got regular 91 at 201.9, so 202 per litre, and next stop Inglewood, if I'm correct.
Z had 91 at $1.97.9 a litre in New Plymouth, but not so down south a touch.
Okay, just cruising through Inglewood now, sometimes known as Ingle Mud round here. 91, $2.01 or $2.02, and $1.30.9 for diesel.
Stratford, as it likes to remind you, is in the heart of Taranaki, and there's a wee price to pay for that privilege.
Ooh, snippy here. We've just pulled up in Stratford. First gas station at Stratford is a Caltex, and regular 91 here is selling for $1.99.9 or $2 a litre. I can see a Z station just up the road, so we'll jump back in the car and go and take a look at what they're doing.
But what I found instead was a competitively priced Allied Petroleum station.
Okay, here we are at the southern end of Stratford at the Allied 24/7 fuel stop, which is selling 91 octane at $1.95.5. And I'll just turn back round. There's the Z station I spoke about earlier, and I believe there's also another rural stop, and that'll be us, and then we'll head back into New Plymouth, which is about half an hour away from here.
Z and rural fuel in Stratty checked in at $2.01.9, but there was an obvious omission in my survey that needed resolving.
So we're back in the city now in New Plymouth, and no petrol price comparison piece would really be complete without checking in at Gull. So we've stopped at the Gull on Leach Street, where they're selling 91 at 192.7. So they come out top of the pile, just sneaking in ahead of the BP, where we tanked up about an hour or so ago.
Our Nelson reporter Tracy Neal also took to the roads, filling up first at the BP at Haven Road for a pretty steep $2.17.9 a litre for 91 octane.
I'm on my way now through Richmond and on to Motueka to see what the difference is 10k, 50k out of Nelson City.
Bragging about the weather, it was then off to Tahuna.
So I'm currently driving through Tahunanui, just past the beach. It's a beautiful day. I'm now approaching the mobile service station here, where the price is exactly the same, $2.17.9 for 91 octane.
They're a consistent bunch down south.
Now coming through the Richmond traffic lights, all three sets of them. So NPD has exactly the same price, $2.17.9 a litre for 91 octane, and just on my right we've got Z Energy, and exactly the same again, $2.17.9 a litre for 91 octane fuel.
Not so, say independent suppliers Nelson Petroleum Distributors in Motueka.
So I'm now on High Street, Motueka, just under 50 kilometres west of Nelson, and I'm outside NPD self-serve station, that's Nelson Petroleum Distributors, and they're loudly declaring discount fuel, and of course it is, because here it's just over $2 a litre, so that's cheaper than in Nelson or Richmond.
Z and BP in Motueka pipped Nelson by a solitary cent at $2.16.9 per litre. In the winterless north, our reporter Lois Williams checked out BP stations in and north of Whangarei.
Okay, so I'm coming up here to the BP service station on Riverside Drive in Whangarei, and their prices today, just looking at their big sign here, unleaded 91, $2.01.9. Now this is a service station that's on the way out to Whangarei Heads, so if you forgot to get gas in town, you'd probably stop here.
But you'll save a few cents a few kilometres north of Whangarei.
Okay, first stop out of Whangarei, and we are at the Cody BP service station on State Highway 1, and the price here for 91 appears to be $2.13.1. So $2.13.
At Gasoline Alley, which BP supplies, and where there's evidently no need for a sign, it's cheaper still.
This is the Towai gas station and convenience store. I quite often fill up here on the way north. I've got to ask them what they're charging. Good morning, I'm from Radio New Zealand. We're just having a look at fuel prices around the district, and I'm wondering what you're charging at the moment for 91.
1 second. So what are we charging at the moment?
Yes.
I think it'll be, 1 second I can check, it's $2.06 I think. Yeah. How much is the back there?
$2.13 back at Cody.
Oh, the BP.
Yeah, back at the BP.
Yeah, we got $2.06 here.
$2.06?
Yeah.
Well, you're cheaper than the BP. So from?
From BP.
From BP?
Yeah.
BP's Moirewa station says it would be charging $2.06 for 91 if it had any, but it's emptied its tanks as it waits for replacements. Further north, the chap who answered the phone at BP Kaio says he didn't know what they were charging today, while in the far north, BP Awanui is charging $2.06 for 91. So what does it all mean? Follow the old consumer adage and shop around. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Robin Martinaho.
That's all from us tonight. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Alex Perrottet. Have a good evening.
RNZ News headlines. Hawkins Construction accepts buildings at Botany Downs School in Auckland suffered from poor workmanship, but says they still complied with the building code. MSD says it can't promise homeless families they won't be moved again out of emergency accommodation to make way for tourists. Hefty fines for visitors who violate new track rules in the Waitakere and Hanua ranges as the council battles kauri dieback. And Victoria University is considering changing its name to avoid confusion. Our next news and weather at 7.
The top-rated RNZ app makes it easy to listen live to all our radio stations, find programs and podcasts, and bookmark or download your favourites to carry with you.
Kia ora and welcome to the third season of Black Sheep.
The RNZ app has all the